Hey there, everyone, and a happy Friday to you all. I'm Errol Barnett, in for our friend Vladimir Duthier, and we are watching all the news happening around the United States and the world. Israel is vowing retaliation for the string of bus attacks in Tel Aviv and receiving the wrong remains returned to them from Hamas, this chain of events that now puts the ceasefire deal in jeopardy. Senate Republicans stage an all-night vote-a-rama to deliver a budget plan to President Trump. But will their colleagues on the other side of Capitol Hill go along with this? And the suspect accused of killing the United Healthcare CEO faces a judge here in New York City today. We'll look at where the case stands and when he may face his first trial. This is CBS News 24/7. So we begin with two big developments out of the Middle East. Late last night, several buses exploded in what appeared to be a coordinated attack. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now vowing to make Hamas pay for failing to return the body of a deceased Israeli hostage. You may remember yesterday, the militant group handed over the bodies of 4 hostages, said to be Shiri Bibas and her 2 young children, Ariel and Kafir, as well as Oded Lifshitz. But overnight, Israel's defense forces announced one of the bodies received was not that of the mother.
These Hamas monsters also cynically refused to bring back the boy's mother, Shiri, and sent the body of a Gazan woman instead, in brazen violation of the agreement.
Joining us now for more on this, from Jerusalem is CBS News foreign correspondent Deborah Pater. Deborah, I cannot imagine what this is like for the relatives of the victims, but how is Hamas responding to this mix-up? And tell us more about the fallout.
Well, certainly it's prolonging the agony of the family of Shiri Bibas and her 2 children. Hamas has said it remains committed to the deal and will be releasing 6 hostages as planned tomorrow. They say they're going to investigate what happened with Shiri Bibas' body, but point out it could have been mixed up with other human remains found in the rubble after an Israeli strike. But the fallout is continuing here. Right-wing members of Prime Minister Netanyahu's ruling coalition have seized the opportunity to push the view that the war should restart. But then you have the community of Near Oz, the kibbutz that the Bibas family were part of, calling for release, not revenge, and urging the government to bring Shiri Bibas' body back in a way that does not jeopardize the continuation of the ceasefire and the release of all the hostages. Negotiations for that second phase have not yet taken place, Errol, even though this first stage ends in just over a week.
And this surprising development, Deborah, comes after a series of bus explosions last night near Tel Aviv. Those buses were not occupied, but what do we know about what happened?
Well, exactly, Errol. As the country was still grieving over the return of those 4 bodies, there were those series of explosions on at least 3 buses in central Israel. Now, police say the bombs were all identical and equipped with timers, but that there were no injuries. But since then, the process of getting to the bottom of this has become very murky. Unusually, nobody has claimed responsibility for the blast. Israeli media is reporting that 2 Israeli suspects have been arrested, but then a court-issued gag order prevents the publication of any more details on that investigation and also any information that could reveal the identity of the suspects.
All right, Deb Pater with all the latest for us out of Jerusalem. Deborah, thank you. Senate Republicans passed a budget resolution just a few hours ago after pulling an all-nighter through a process known as a vote-a-rama. The measure is aimed at jump-starting President Trump's legislative agenda. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins us live from Capitol Hill with more on this. Nicole, certainly not your first vote-a-rama, as we were discussing earlier today, but break down for us what was in this package and why lawmakers stayed up all night to get it done.
Yeah, well, basically, this is a budget resolution, and it's designed to kind of unlock this process to expedite or fast track the president's legislative agenda. So a big chunk of the money in this package, about $175 billion, will be earmarked for border security, things like increasing detention beds, increasing staffing around the border, especially as the president tries to enact his mass deportation plan. And then it has about $150 billion that will go towards defense spending and also energy independence, which has also been a priority of the president. And part of the reason why they stayed up all night to do this is, they wanted to get her done, at least Senate Republicans did. But also, generally speaking, with kind of a bigger, broader package like this, it's not uncommon to see lawmakers want to add various amendments and make some tweaks to it. So in that process, you have votes upon votes on these different amendments. But the strategy, at least for Senate Democrats, was to try to use that as an opportunity to force Republicans to take some pretty hard votes on some of these cuts that we're seeing the Trump administration make, whether or not they back these cuts to the federal workforce, these cuts to federal agencies. Also, how far they're going to go with some of these tax cuts, what they're going to use to pay for them. Will it be, on the backs of the middle class? So there were some kind of more political messaging types of amendments that were folded into this votorama, if you will, which is why, even though many of them didn't pass, but that's why the process was kind of drawn out and it took all night.
Did Nicole Killian just say, get her done? This is why you watch CBS News 24/7, folks. You never know how we will contextualize these important stories. I know that the House still needs to take up a budget bill as well, Nicole. There are some differences. Help us understand what that is, because ultimately they'll need to be on the same page.
Yeah, that's right. And, we've talked a lot on this program about the president wanting this so-called one big, beautiful bill, which is really kind of what the House plans to take up next week. And so in addition to funding those border security priorities, for instance, energy proposals, this also includes an extension or paying for an extension of the president's tax cuts, which has also been a high priority for congressional Republicans and for the president. It also includes an increase in the debt limit as well, because, of course, with more spending, you're going to need to increase the credit limit for the nation's credit card, if you will. So all of that is wrapped into one big, beautiful bill. And certainly while Senate Republicans support some of these ideas, they felt it was easier to make, have a narrower package and do the tax cuts in a second bill. The House, on the other hand, wanted to put this all in one because they may just get one shot at this. And so that's what they are taking up next week.
Really interesting. Nicole Killian, we appreciate your reporting as always, joining us from Capitol Hill. Now, we know a big part of the president's agenda is cutting waste. Yesterday, a federal judge paved the way for Elon Musk and the so-called Doge team to go ahead with mass layoffs. Let's bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Zhang to tell us more about this. Weijia, what does this ruling do and what does it not do?
Does allow for the time being, Errol, for these mass firings continue, because the U.S. District Court judge here in Washington essentially said that the lawsuit that these labor unions filed amounted to an employment dispute, and they have to file it in a different way. Essentially, he said it was outside of his jurisdiction. But it's important to note he did not rule on the legality of what the administration is doing and how they were doing it. He's simply saying that he is not the right person, frankly, to be deciding this. So we do expect more lawsuits, Errol. In fact, there are already several in the works, including class action lawsuits by fired employees who believe their termination was wrongful.
And we should highlight that it's not just people in the nation's capital being hit by these federal layoffs. You've got people all over the United States impacted. And I know the Pentagon expects to be hit hard. What numbers are we hearing from them of the number of people that will lose their jobs?
That's right, Errol. It is federal workers across the country, not just here in the Washington, D.C. area. And we know that the Secretary of Defense has already said he wants to cut about 8% of the Pentagon's budget every year for the next 5 years. Now, remember, they have the biggest budget of all the agencies. So we're talking about $50 billion a year. And our colleague, Ellie Watson, is just now reporting that two U.S. officials say that about 50,000 people in the Department of Defense are considered probationary workers. That means they have fewer protections to being fired. That means they have fewer experience. They've probably been there for only 1 to 2 years. So 50,000 people could be impacted by these probationary civilian cuts, and they are expected, Errol, to begin as soon as today. And remember, a lot of these guys and women, they are veterans, and so that's also been a question for President Trump because, of course, he has always talked about, how much support he gives veterans.
That's right. And so many of these people are wanting to give the government their best, their services, their skills. That won't happen as they're being let go. And it's not just the Department of Defense, which may lose people into the thousands. What are we learning about other agencies that will be hit quite hard?
Yeah, our data team actually did a deep dive into every single federal agency and found that really nobody is immune. And even though there might be exceptions within the agencies of some people considered critical, every agency is going to have cuts. You see here, the IRS has already cut around 6,000 jobs. The National Institutes of Health, around 2,000. The CDC, nearly 1,300, and Veterans Affairs more than 1,000. And these are just the numbers to begin, Errol, because we don't know what targets each agency has. We just know that they have been given a directive to dramatically reduce the workforce. And so at the end of the day, it could be several more thousands of federal workers, Errol, who are now all competing for new jobs, whether it's in the private sector or for their old jobs back again.
Yeah, Weija, that's a great point. For anyone out there already looking for a job, finding it difficult, you're now going to be joined by tens of thousands of folks from the government, likely also to look for other work. Weija Zhang, we appreciate your reporting and those numbers. Thanks so much. Millions of people in the central and southern U.S., they are heading into the weekend with this, more bone-chilling temperatures. Take a look at Kansas City. Some folks there experiencing below zero conditions. And you've also got southern Louisiana and Mississippi dropping into the 20s. They're not usually used to this. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with a first look at the national forecast. Grant, there are people that aren't, used to these chilly temperatures. They may not even have all the right clothing and jackets.
No, you're right, Errol. I mean, it's a concern because you're right. They are not prepared for the heat. The infrastructure is not prepared for the cold, I should say, to stay warm. So that's the concern as we go through the next couple of days. But the good news is that Arctic air is going to begin to retreat as we go into the weekend. But this morning, many across the central and eastern half of the United States waking up to those bone-chilling temperatures. And it is a chill because the wind picks up and it drops those feels-like temperatures to about 10 to 15 degrees colder than it actually is. Places like Memphis right now feeling like 10 degrees. Dallas feels like 17 degrees. It's still really cold up to the northern tier state. Bismarck feeling like 8 degrees below zero. But all of that Arctic air will retreat back to the north, allowing temperatures to moderate as we go through the next several days. Oklahoma City back into the 60s by Saturday. We do have to talk about another atmospheric river event, Errol, over on the West Coast. We'll take a closer peek at that coming up here in just a little bit.
All right, Grant, we appreciate it. We'll see you later this hour. We are learning new information about the pilot and the flight crew aboard that Delta flight that crash landed in Toronto. We've got those details for you next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back. Delta has released new details on the crew, which was manning the plane that crash landed in Toronto Monday. The company said the unnamed captain and first officer are qualified and FAA certified for their jobs. Delta also refuted claims they had failed parts of their training. 76 passengers and 4 crew were on board that plane. You'll remember when it crashed and flipped upside down on the tarmac. Amazingly, everyone survived this. The cause of the crash is still under investigation. This is the first day on the job for newly confirmed FBI Director Kash Patel. His nomination passed the Senate yesterday, but just barely, as changes to the Bureau are already taking place. Let's bring in Department of Justice correspondent Scott McFarland for more on this. Scott, what are some of the major changes Patel has earmarked to transform the FBI starting now?
Errol, during his confirmation hearings, Kash Patel said he would return the FBI to its, quote, core mission and stop the politicization of the Bureau. And critics of the Trump administration would say the FBI had not deviated from its core mission and was not politicized. So that's a bit of a political argument he's bringing. And that's what concerns so many Trump critics, that there is a Trump loyalist running the Bureau, which is supposed to be independent of politics and making non-political arguments. But all of those norms seem to have been shattered when Chris Wray, Kash Patel's predecessor, was forced out of the FBI at the very end of the Biden administration, and the new president nominated a new FBI director. Traditionally, Errol, there are 10-year terms for FBI directors so that they can transcend administrations and transcend politics. So the question, as Kash Patel takes the oath at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time today, is will he be an independent voice as he's pledged, as he did under questioning at the Senate, or will he be a Trump ally in that role?
And Scott, it wasn't just Chris Wray. There were other senior DOJ officials also pushed out. There was a list of those officials who worked on the January 6th investigation. So what does this mean for what Kash Patel's FBI will do?
It's possible that list of 5,000 FBI employees and agents who are affiliated with the January 6th investigation, it's possible that list makes its way to Kash Patel's desk eventually. I know a number of the agents on that list are worried about retribution or being fired for following orders and investigating the attack on the U.S. Capitol, an attack which is being rewritten as we speak in real time. Whether Kash Patel acts on that list is a different question for a different day, but he is going to be in charge of the Bureau. It's field offices nationwide. It's thousands of employees beginning tonight here in Washington.
Scott MacFarlane live from Washington for us. Scott, thank you. All right, we've got this happening in real time. Cape Canaveral, Florida, SpaceX launching a Falcon 9 rocket in seconds. You've got 23 Starlink satellites on board. Let's listen and watch as it unfolds.
2, 1, ignition. Liftoff. Go Falcon, go Starlink. Engine chamber pressures are nominal.
And the bottom left corner of your screen shows that this rocket now moving at more than 700 kilometers an hour, pushing up to more than 800 kilometers an hour. I cannot do the fast math for you on how many miles that is, but just an incredible demonstration of what math, science, pure grit and determination can do as this rocket makes its way to the upper atmosphere, through the stratosphere and out into space to continue these missions. The speed now currently more than 1,400 kilometers per hour. We will continue to track this and bring you more footage and updates as it becomes available. Shooting suspect Luigi Mangione is set to appear in court here in New York City in just a matter of hours. Coming up next, what to expect as he faces murder and terror charges for the death of the United Healthcare CEO. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. A warm welcome back. Here are the top stories we're tracking for you right now. Eric Menendez claims he and his brother Lyle have been violently bullied and assaulted in a California prison. They're currently serving life behind bars for killing their parents inside the family's Beverly Hills mansion back in 1989. In a phone interview with TMZ, Eric Menendez said Lyle's jaw was broken during one of the attacks. The duo is awaiting a hearing to decide whether they should be resentenced for their parents' murder. Over in Arizona, body camera footage captured the harrowing moments an officer and an off-duty firefighter rescued a woman trapped inside that burning car. A fire erupted after a crash on a busy highway just outside of Phoenix. The officer used his baton to smash open the window, and the firefighter pulled the woman to safety. She thankfully only had minor injuries. And criminal charges were dropped against 3 of the 5 people indicted in connection to the death of singer Liam Payne. The former One Direction star fell from a hotel balcony in Buenos Aires last October, you'll remember. The toxicology report revealed he had drugs and alcohol in his system. The 3 men were cleared of manslaughter charges, but 2 others have been ordered to remain in detention on charges they sold drugs to Payne in the days and possibly even hours before his death. If convicted, they could face up to 14 years in prison. All right, back here in New York City, the man accused of killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, he's due back in a courtroom here in just a few hours. This is the first appearance since December for 26-year-old Luigi Mangione, who has so far pleaded not guilty to both state and federal charges. Let's bring in CBS News national correspondent Nikki Batiste, who's tracking all of this. Nikki, what do we expect to happen today? Because the trial itself isn't even underway yet.
Errol, today is really procedural. What we might find out is a trial date for the New York State case. Perhaps there'll be some motions about evidence or discovery the judge will consider. But I think what is most interesting to viewers is that we will see Luigi Mangione for the first time in about 2 months. I think people will wonder, what's his behavior like? What's his demeanor like? Will he try to say something when he's walking into the courtroom, or will he be calm? We saw him be a little bit defiant in his first hearing. Will that happen again today?
We just replayed some of the footage from the last time that we saw him arriving in New York, surrounded by so much security. And this is a hearing for the state case, but viewers should remember there are federal charges against him as well. What's happening on that front?
Right. 4 of the 20 counts against Mangione are federal, 2 for stalking, 2 each for murder with the use of a firearm. It's the murder with the use of a firearm that makes Mangione eligible for the death penalty. But prosecutors have not said yet whether or not they would pursue it. There is a hearing coming up in March for his federal case.
And you bring up a good point. There is the possibility of the death penalty here, but you also have, because of the attention this case has received, because of its connection to the healthcare industry, so much attention from people as well. Has that changed, and how is that impacting Mangione's defense?
The attention does not seem to have waned. In fact, Mangione's lawyers created a website, and on it is a legal defense fund that has about $500,000 now. But what's really important for people to remember that this case is about justice for Brian Thompson, who was murdered and who has two sons and a wife at home. And at the end of the day, that's what this is about.
That's right. A widow, 2 children left now without, a pillar of their lives. Nikki, thank you so much for those updates. Meantime, New York Governor Kathy Hochul is letting Mayor Eric Adams keep his job, but not without some oversight. Hochul said she considered removing Adams after the Justice Department moved to drop the corruption charges against him. CBS News New York reporter Elijah Westbrook brings us more on this.
Good morning. Well, New York Governor Kathy Hochul has announced a series of steps aimed at reducing the power of Mayor Eric Adams. This following a slew of controversy, particularly when it comes to his involvement with the Trump administration. We know at this time that she is now relying on a group of elected city officials to go around him in challenging the actions of the Trump administration. And so right there on your screen, you can see that they include establishing a new inspector general for the city who is able to direct the Department of Investigations to open new probes, bar Adams from firing the city's top internal investigator without state approval, allow the city council speaker, public advocate, even the comptroller to circumvent the mayor's office in filing lawsuits against the Trump administration, and give the state comptroller more money to monitor the city and its finances. Now, we know at this time that most of the governor's proposals require approval from city and state lawmakers. If they pass, Hochul says that they would remain in effect until the end of the year, and they are subject to renewal at a later date. That's the latest at this time from Manhattan's East Side. Elijah Westbrook, CBS News, New York.
All right, Elijah, thank you for that. 10 former New York corrections officers are out on bail this morning. They were arrested yesterday and charged in connection to the death of an inmate that was captured on body cam video. And we have to give you a warning here. What you're about to see is disturbing. Video from last December appears to show the officers repeatedly beating 43-year-old Robert Brooks at the Marcy Correctional Facility outside Syracuse. CBS News' Jerika Duncan has the latest.
One by one, 5 former New York corrections officers entered the courtroom handcuffed Thursday.
Answer, please, if not guilty.
And pleaded not guilty to charges of second-degree murder and manslaughter. The men are accused of attacking Robert Brooks, some kicking and punching him while he was restrained on a medical exam table at Marcy Correctional Facility last December. Brooks' son, Robert Brooks Jr., spoke after the arraignment.
I will never get my father back. The men have robbed me of that opportunity. Still, indictments are an important step towards accountability.
3 other former corrections officers were charged with manslaughter for failing to stop the attack. They also pleaded not guilty. According to the unsealed indictment, another person was charged with tampering with physical evidence for allegedly trying to remove bloodstains in the area where the fatal beating took place.
Robert died of massive beating to his body, both externally and internally. He also died as a result of repeated restrictions to his airways, causing severe brain damage. And finally, he died by choking on his own blood.
Onondaga County District Attorney William Fitzpatrick said the investigation also revealed Brooks was assaulted 2 other times that night, in addition to the attack captured on camera.
I think any sentient human being looking at the tapes naturally comes to the conclusion that he must have said something. He must have spit at the officers. He must have resisted in some way. And the fact of the matter is, he did absolutely nothing.
The officers charged with murder could be sentenced to life in prison. Those charged with manslaughter are facing a potential 15 years in prison. Our appreciation to Jerika Duncan for her reporting on that. All right, now we move to this. Ukraine and European allies are being vigilant after a meeting between the U.S. envoy to Ukraine and President Zelensky. General Keith Kellogg praised the, quote, positive meeting after a war of words between President Trump and Zelensky. Let's bring in BBC correspondent Abdul Jalil Abdurasulov. President Zelensky says he met with the U.S. envoy yesterday in Kyiv, despite these boiling tensions stemming from President Trump's remarks. What came out of this meeting?
Well, to be honest, we don't have a lot of details because the press conference following that meeting between President Zelensky and General Kellogg was cancelled. And for some people, that was a sign that the General Kellogg is being increasingly sidelined from the process. Following that event, President Zelensky posted on his social media saying that the meeting gave a hope. And General Kellogg also tweeted or sent a post on X, formerly known as Twitter, saying that the meeting was extensive and positive. When he came here, he said that his mission was to listen, and the Ukrainian officials were very hopeful that he could deliver their message to Donald Trump, that they cannot trust Vladimir Putin, and that they have to have a joint plan. They need to discuss between the US, Europe, and Ukraine, discuss their positions, and only then approach Moscow and start negotiations with them. However, there are questions whether General Kellogg has ear of Donald Trump, because, as I said, yesterday the press conference was cancelled, and also earlier during the visit to Saudi Arabia, he wasn't there. So there are questions here whether he can convince Donald Trump to persuade him and pass on the messages that Ukrainian officials want here.
And Abdul Jalil, you wonder what other options President Zelensky even has. Despite his frustration at President Trump's comments in regards to Russia, Europe is even divided on how it could back up Ukraine. So talk to us about the unique position Zelensky is in and how, in many ways, he's running out of choices.
He is in a very delicate and difficult position. And in fact, when he was responding to the initial claims made by Donald Trump, he was actually carefully choosing his words exactly for the same reason, in order not to antagonize Donald Trump, and because he cannot afford losing an ally like the United States. This is the main ally of Ukraine. And Kyiv admits that without American military support, it will be extremely hard for them to continue their resistance to Russian aggression. Just a few examples. For the Patriot systems, air defense systems, the American air defense systems, they are already running out of ammunition and missiles for that, and they need more launchers and units in order to expand and improve their air defense capacity. But they're already facing these difficulties, and this weapon is the only weapon that can intercept hypersonic missiles, like Russian Kinzhal. So without American military support, certainly the airstrikes that Russia launches almost every day will be even more lethal than they are already. And there are also questions about ammunition. There are questions about the F-16 fighter jets. And if the United States withdraws its support for Ukraine, then all this may stop.
Such an important point, Abdul Jalil Abdurrassulov, joining us out of Kyiv. Thank you so much for those updates from Ukraine. We want to cross now to CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi. Olivia, there's such an interesting point made there about the air defense systems from Ukraine. What's the latest you're hearing from the White House on why they chose to cancel the press conference between Zelensky and Keith Kellogg? That's not an encouraging sign, or at least it seems like it's not.
Well, it's interesting as this is all coming as these meetings are happening in a flurry. We're learning that that press conference between the two was scrapped. We're hearing from the Ukrainians, though, that it was at the request of the U.S. side to not do a press conference at the end of this and rather have just a quick photo op spray. There was a question asked to Zelensky at the end of that photo op spray about how he's feeling, and he said he's in a fighting spirit. Interesting to note there. But this all comes as, of course, tensions are really deepening between the U.S. and Ukraine, between the leadership, as Donald Trump has said that he's blaming the start of the war in Ukraine on Zelensky, and Zelensky saying that Trump was parroting misinformation from both sides. And this is as they're trying to find an end to this war. Take a listen to what National Security Advisor Mike Waltz had to say just a short while ago at CPAC, where he was talking about this exact issue.
Fire in Gaza post-October 7th, then what? Oppose peace in Europe? It makes no sense. But with his leadership, we've now opened negotiations. We're sitting down with our host, the Saudis, and talking to the Russians, understanding what they are going to need, and then understanding what the Ukrainians are going to need, talking to all of the Europeans. You can't end a war if you don't talk to both sides, and that's what we're doing.
Thank you.
It's kind of common sense.
So there he is there talking about the reason why it's important that they're all talking to each other. Of course, the Europeans at the table, Ukrainians, and the Russians as well. Very important to have them in on the conversation. Keith Kellogg being there today, he's still there in Ukraine having some meetings. This is the last day of those meetings. But we'll be looking forward to see what else is on the calendar, what else is on the table as the White House seeks an end to this nearly 3-year-long war.
Yeah, Olivia, and observers are noting the order of the conversations, which is noteworthy, that President Trump has said he's open to meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, maybe even in person, to discuss what comes next, while Zelensky hasn't had that specific offer yet. Have we heard anything new on a potential one-on-one between Trump and Putin?
Nothing quite new yet. We heard from President Trump this week where he said he wants to meet with Putin perhaps this month. Putin's, the Kremlin, saying that a meeting could come this month as well. But of course, there's only 1 week left of this month. And we know next week, President Trump will be meeting with Emmanuel Macron, the French president, as well as Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, here in Washington next week. So meetings happening with European allies, not quite yet with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Secretary of State Marco Rubio just came back from Saudi Arabia, where he said that a meeting with Putin will largely depend on progress on ending the war, essentially what they can all offer and what they could get on the table from all sides. So when you're hearing about these meetings with Keith Kellogg, the special envoy to Ukraine, in Ukraine, what we're hearing about the critical minerals deal, all of these sorts of drips and drabs of information we're getting out of the Ukrainian side is ultimately so that they can come to the table, the U.S. can come to the table with the Russians and say, here's where our vested interest lies, here's where we want to see the end of this war, and really having those conversations with them. So I suspect that they're waiting for all the stars to align in this very, very intricate web of information about ending this war.
That's right. There are many moving pieces. Olivia Rinaldi joining us from our D.C. bureau. Olivia, thank you for your reporting. The polar vortex is once again bringing freezing temperatures to much of the country. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore. He has another look at the national weather forecast. Grant, at least there's some relief in sight, but how do things look now?
It's coming, Errol. It's not going to be in a matter of a day, but gradually this Arctic air, the polar vortex, if you will, beginning to lift back up to the north. Let's pull up the map here. Let me show you this. These are all the cold weather alerts that are in effect. Now, you go back most of the week, we've had these extreme cold weather warnings that were in place across much of the country. Now we just have these cold weather advisories across the southern states right now. In fact, about 28 million people underneath this threat for colder than normal temperatures along with some breezy conditions. Now, that doesn't mean that it's still not cold to the north. You look up towards Bismarck where temperatures are around 3 degrees, Wichita, Kansas, right around 9 degrees. So, I mean, it's cold, but places across the south are still dealing with these temperatures that are not just cold, but rare for them to be this cold. In fact, a lot of record temperatures in place across the area this morning and then later on this afternoon as well. But again, this Arctic air and that polar vortex will begin to lift back up towards the north, allowing for temperatures to moderate as we go into the weekend. It's still cold out there this morning. Bismarck, yes, 3, but it feels like 8 degrees below zero. Look at Dallas. There's the cold air, 26 degrees in Dallas. It feels like 17 with the wind chill. And then you've got that cold air extending up into parts of the Northeast where New York this morning waking up. I mean, seasonable, maybe a little colder than normal, but the wind is the real thing in the Northeast today with feels like temperatures right now in New York at 17 degrees. So temperatures begin to warm up as we go into the weekend. In fact, Oklahoma City is back into the 50s tomorrow, 60s or rather 50s today, 60s tomorrow, and actually near 70 for Sunday. That cold air will gradually retreat. Got some snow across the Great Lakes states and those windy conditions over the Northeast this afternoon. Back to the west, you've got dry conditions with another atmospheric river event in the Pacific Northwest. That will continue through the weekend into early next week. Errol, back to you.
All right, very good stuff. Grant, thank you very much. The first ever Four Nations hockey tournament, it came to a close last night after what turned into quite a heated and politically charged series. We'll explain why that is next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Canada's men's hockey team are the champions of the first ever Four Nations face-off. They scored the title after an overtime win against Team USA just last night in Boston, with NHL superstar Connor McDavid making the game-winning goal to clinch the trophy. And after the win, Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau posted this to X, taking the opportunity to not just celebrate the win, but take a swipe at President Trump's call to make Canada the 51st state. You see there, Trudeau wrote, "You can't take our country, and you can't take our game." CBS News Boston reporter Levon Reed has more on last night's epic battle on the ice.
You know, the remedy for the Four Nations face-off was there for this to be great. Every player that was playing and participating was doing it for their country. You got that feel of a mid-season Olympic tournament. Now, it was Team Canada versus Team USA. Last week, Team Canada lost to Team USA, but this time around, here at the Garden, Team Canada was able to get the victory. Packed house at the TD Gardens for this final for Team Canada versus Team USA. This one will go to overtime, tied at 2, and then the best player in the game did his thing. Connor McDavid, the game winner for Canada right there. Tough loss for Team USA. They lose 3-2. Team Canada wins the first ever Nations face-off. And I will tell you what, the NHL does this extremely right. When you talk to some of the players, they said they were nervous like this was Game 7 of a Stanley Cup final. And then the NHL put it in Montreal, and they also put it in Boston. 2 of the original 6 cities. They were able to get the passion from the fans, and from those fans who were maybe new hockey fans, well, they were able to come out and see what hockey is all about with some of the best stars in the game. Here in Boston, I'm Levin Reed. Back to you.
Nice. Levin, thank you very much. The U.S. will have their chance at revenge, though, in next year's Olympic Games. The NHL announced player participation in 2026 after not allowing players to play for their country since 2014. All right, one Midwestern town is giving props to its hometown hero. You're looking at the city of Des Moines, Iowa. It unfurled these 2 banners of WNBA star Caitlin Clark. One of these things is 4 feet tall. The other is 6 feet. The University of Iowa alum drew a record number of fans during her Final Four run and also drew in crowds for her first pro season. And one of these banners reads, "If you can't win, then win. That was part of her Nike commercial, you may remember, that aired during the Super Bowl. Very cool stuff. All right, coming up, one last look at your weekend forecast. You know where you are. This is CBS News 24/7. Welcome back. While President Trump is cutting jobs, a search is on for a new generation of workers to build submarines. The Navy has ordered 29 nuclear subs, and the company that makes them has school kids on its sonar. Charlie Daggett visited the Connecticut school to learn more about the program.
At Charles Barnum Elementary School in Groton, Connecticut.
And there are a lot of pipes on a submarine.
These fifth graders are learning about submarines.
We are going to build some of these periscopes.
It's actually working! I can see Alexander!
This is the beginning of a recruitment effort by General Dynamics Electric Boat, Groton's biggest employer and the Navy's biggest submarine builder.
People sometimes are like, why are you in the elementary schools? 2033, the people we're hiring, some of them are in fifth grade right now.
Courtney Murphy is in charge of bringing new workers to Electric Boat.
What do you need right now?
Trade workers, welders, machinists.
That training is well underway at nearby El Grasso Technical High School. Students here work with the same state-of-the-art equipment they use at the shipyard. They learn to work in hot, cramped spaces similar to submarines. Jameer Fletcher is a senior.
What is it about welding that drew you to it?
It makes me focus. Once you start welding, that's it. You're dead set on the welding.
It's part of a national effort by shipyards and the Navy to bring on 100,000 skilled workers over the next 10 years. They're urgently needed to build a new fleet of nuclear missile submarines and smaller, fast attack subs. To do that, Electric Boat needs to more than double production.
It is the Navy's #1 construction priority. That's how important it is.
Admiral William Houston heads the Navy's nuclear-powered fleet.
What is it specifically about submarines that make them so critical to what you need right now?
They can go anywhere, anytime, and hold an adversary at risk. They can just watch what you're doing, and you don't even know they're there.
The problem? The Navy says it doesn't have enough of them. Electric Boat is ramping up to meet that national security challenge, a challenge Adam Chicola and Emma Isbell are happy to take on.
It's a lot of stress, but the more you do it, the easier, the more natural it gets.
I know there's a lot of pressure, but you guys are making it sound like fun.
Oh, it's so fun.
You gotta have fun doing it. That's what takes the pressure off.
There's not a lot of people in the world that can say that they build nuclear submarines. Like, it's pretty cool.
As far as the Navy's concerned, there aren't enough people who can say they build nuclear submarines. And the future of the fleet is riding on it. For Eye on America, I'm Charlie Daggett in Groton, Connecticut.
Awesome story, Charlie. Thank you for that. Now, take a look at this. A bull on the loose in the cold rural hills of western Connecticut. Really rough place, I hear. This is a Scottish Highland bull. It's been roaming for over a month in the frigid weather, escaping from its confines, apparently. And local residents say they've spotted this guy on several occasions running around New Milford and Kent, if you're familiar with the area. So far, though, no one has been able to capture the animal. I wouldn't advise you to go anywhere near it, okay? It looks serious. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore, who has a look at the national forecast. Any good cow tipping stories, Grant? Because some people do go near livestock.
No, I didn't, and I would probably agree with you, Errol, to leave the whole bull catching to the professionals, right?
Yes.
Oh, man. Look, we got cold conditions still across the central and eastern United States. That cold will lift to the north as we go through the weekend. Something that we're going to be watching for the next several days will be the next atmospheric river event with a whole line of storm systems that will be ushering in this moisture to the Pacific Northwest as we go through the weekend, even into next week. Some places in the higher elevations area could pick up 2 to 3 feet of snow through early next week. Back over to you for now.
All right. Appreciate you, Grant. Enjoy your weekend. And that does it for me. I'll see you Monday on the CBS Morning News at 7 a.m. Next, it's Mugo Odigwe live from San Francisco with all the breaking news from coast to coast. This is CBS News 24/7.